Hello, dear hearts. So, I would love to continue to talk and exchange with you regarding Enlightened Lineages, which has been my ongoing work throughout my whole life. It's been the prime focus and concern, and because, as you all know, I've not been exposed to just one lineage of enlightenment. It really did create the enthusiasm in me and joy in me to make sure that every single enlightened lineage that can possibly be found, intact or not, is remembered for the sake of everybody on this earth. Because when we think about enlightenment, getting liberated for the benefit of others, and of course for us, for our own greatest result, it brings so much meaning to our birth and life itself and the roles we play, because there's an aim, wanting really the best for ourselves and everybody. And understanding and exploring the word enlightenment, first and foremost, we do need to go into the wonderful school of philosophy, which, when we look at unbroken lineages, we can go back to Gautama Siddhartha, which is the Buddha Shakyamuni, and his lineage, and he's taught the truth and shown the path to awakening very clearly, and that was done around 2,600 years ago, and that took place in ancient India. And there are unbroken lineages leading us right up until today. My lifelong teacher, Dzongsar Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, is a teacher of that, of the incredible truth which comes from Gautama Siddhartha, but he's also very active in doing everything he can to protect and support enlightened lineages of the Himalayas, of that region, of his own birth lineages, and ancient Indian wisdom schools of thought and tradition, which is an incredible world to explore, because that all was blooming during the time of Gautama Siddhartha and continued to for quite some time after him. And that's where the excitement steps in on my part, having the ancient Greek lineage and having an incredible mother who's Greek, whose parents are Greek, and being very exposed to that part of the world through my mother's line, which really did establish certain wisdom traditions and lineages in me, coming from the ancient Greek schools of thought as well, and philosophy schools and philosophers. And the excitement comes from the great exchange that happened between ancient India and ancient Greece. And so much of this has been diluted, ignored, put to the side, not seen as what it is, and only given to us in fragments because of all that happened in between the so-called original West and places like ancient India in the East, all that happened in the in-between, and also recent few hundred years have stopped from being available directly. There's a lot of fragments of information, but direct information is much more tricky to access. But thanks to so many like myself who are very, very interested, great works are coming out, so much is being resurrected and put out there in ways that we can re-establish those bridges and understand the value of the enlightened lineages of the original West, which is ancient Greece, and the beauty of how that was linked to ancient India. So when we look at this word enlightenment, as I was saying, it's necessary to go back to what Gautama Siddhartha taught. And the Buddha Shakyamuni, what he expounded prior to becoming a religion, was indeed the truth. It was the truth being taught, which can be applied to, after that, philosophical schools and ways of studying one's nature. You could also semi-tie it to certain ways of approaching subjects such as science and the science of the mind. But as it evolved or became or was incorporated into religious systems, the beauty of it is still you can really see how it goes beyond that. And ancient Greece, all of which was ancient Greece in terms of enlightened lineages there, and the confluence that took place between ancient India and ancient Greece, maintained the philosophical aspect. And we can't say that the Orthodox Church embodied all of the wisdom of the enlightened lineages that came from the philosophers and guru-student, teacher-student relationships in many different sections and styles. We can't really say that, but in Buddhism, thankfully, as it evolved and became a religion, there was still a preservation, a protection of teacher-student in some of the schools, and how to become awakened and enlightened, to know yourself, as they would say in ancient Greece, to know your mind, to understand the nature of your mind, to realize the nature of your mind, as they would say in ancient India. That was, I guess, the aim, and that was indeed why obtaining a master who could teach that was crucial. And the ancient Greeks had this guru-student dynamic, definitely, and it worked a lot throughout the philosophical worlds, but also in the mystery schools and the mysteries of certain divinity worship, which the Buddhistic beliefs later on, as it evolved towards a very powerful dimension, which is Vajrayana, that really does activate the concept of divinity and deity and worshipping that, which came later on if you were to compare it to when we had divinity and deity worship in ancient Greece. Vajrayana and the Tibetan Buddhistic system came later on. Still, in the mystery schools, they would also have, in a more secret, private, and hidden setting, both in ancient Greece and still to this day in Tibetan Buddhism, the secrecy around working with divinities and what that can do. Again, for this path to awakening, which was happening on a more private scale. But the same goes for the guru-student, whether you were having that through learning, philosophically learning and evolving in that way, receiving teachings, just like people did listening to Gautama Siddhartha at Vulture Peak Mountain once upon a time, when he was the Buddha Shakyamuni, or when people were, sworn to 5-year silence retreat before they could actually become a disciple of Pythagoras in ancient Greece, to be ready, to go through that purificative process to then receive the wisdom. Either or, however we look at it, the emphasis on the value of teacher-student and the oral transmissions of the gift of the path itself and what this path to awakening can offer the seeker, the truth seeker, was always and will always be done in this way, which involves the hierarchy of a teacher giving it, whether it's done philosophically or symbolically or directly, giving it and bestowing that to the student, the seeker, the truth seeker. And metaphorically, you can see these examples across history and time, and you can also see these examples in the general reality we're in, which unfortunately nowadays there's a lot of emphasis on a fake kind of equality which destroys those who are learned and capable of bestowing wisdom. Because we have access to information, we think we're automatically capable of understanding better than others, or we are just as interested in certain, I guess, openings. However, forget that there's such a structure involved in authentic practice and path. And there is not one historical path towards awakening or any journey that I've ever heard of in terms of the quest itself that you would obtain something very simply or easily because, it's not a big deal, or you don't have to really fuss about it. If you want it, there it is. You can have it, I think these miraculous experiences of realizing something and becoming awakened are looking at the angle of many, many lifetimes, infinite lifetimes, not looking at the angle of the result as it came. So it's definitely a process. And the ancient Greeks did believe in reincarnation, just as the Buddhistic schools believe in reincarnation, and ancient India believed in reincarnation for the most part, right? So again, finding out about enlightenment and what that means, Fortismos in ancient Greek, illumination, awakening in English, moksha is one way to describe it, in Sanskrit, I guess. But many of you would be familiar with the word nirvana as well, as a state of realization and arriving to nirvana, which is the opposite of the suffering world, which is samsara and the cyclic existence, yeah? So, as much as I would love to currently, right now, discuss all the enlightened lineages that I've come across and all the fragments and the masters and the possibilities and the joy to see it so active and how there's infinite realized beings everywhere on this globe and have been everywhere on this globe and are so accessible, and yet, there is so much we have to make sure we need to do to be able to receive the greatness of true help in such a way. I want to keep it on the theme of ancient India and ancient Greece and vice versa, because this is where it all really means something to me. On a personal note, because my lifelong teacher, Dzongsar Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, he would always come to greet my grandparents and my mother, and they would offer him banquets in a very luscious Greek way. And, he would spend hours just wanting to learn from them about ancient Greek philosophers and divinities, and just to learn from them and to listen to what they have to say. And he himself also knew a lot. And my grandparents, the parents of my mother, were very Greek to the point where they were borderline skeptical of anybody who wasn't. But Rinpoche, not being Greek, they actually considered him as being like an ancient Greek. He had that in him, they felt very strongly. And they would say that quite frequently to me, to my mum, and to others, how, they would say, like he's an ancient Greek, he's sitting there in front of us, as a Bhutanese Tibetan, but actually he's an ancient Greek, the way he would talk to them and the knowledge and wisdom he possessed also about what he knew regarding the ancient Greeks, yeah? And he was always very interested in the statues they had on the altar of the different philosophers and ancient Greek divinities. And I remember him always holding them and looking at them and looking at their books, because my grandparents had many books. A lot of them were philosophical, and he would just look through what was there, and offer so much in his presence that made me so certain of the value of everywhere that enlightened lineages have been, the value of everywhere that they have offered the opportunity for others to awaken. We should always pay respect to that. It doesn't matter about, where we personally come from, right? In this incarnation, but having respect to wherever authentic, true lineage, awakened lineages have dwelt. Just valuing that, because it's the nectar of this entire earth. It's the greatness of this entire earth. It's what keeps this whole earth actually functioning, so that somehow eventually we will all realize something true and come out of, I guess, all that keeps us bound, yeah? What was incredibly valuable to me also at that time, and I'm sure for everybody who was witnessing it, is how Dzongsar Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche would say the only two places on this earth, because he's very, very well traveled, and he also was very well traveled back then, because this was long ago, that he felt the same presence, like incredible in terms of his experience, was being in India and being in Greece. These were the two places he felt were almost identical. And he voiced that very strongly to my mom, my mother's family, my grandparents. And, many years later, when I got to travel alone to Greece and live in Greece and be in Greece, I really did understand what that meant, because I had spent so much more time in India prior to my more official time in Greece as an adult, where I could make that comparison too. And yes, that similarity, not just in terms of the way the formula to life is set up, but how there are literally enlightened lineages in every pocket of everything that both Indians do, and what you can find in the real, traditions of what we know as Greece. There's such a comparison, and it's incredibly fascinating when you go into it. Also, their approach towards, again, the stages of life, and what another one of my mentors and, adopted family member, Suresh Jindalji, who's now passed on, who's always blessing, I feel blessing everything. He really did explain those stages of life to me based on the ancient Indian system, and how that links up to awakening and the process of awakening. And, I was amazed to be able to tell him that we also had that we have that in the Greek system, what you're supposed to do at the first stage of your life, and then as you go into your adolescence, to your maturity and then your old age, and what those stages reflect. Now, so much of, I guess, the abundance of the enlightened lineages from places like ancient India and places like ancient Greece have, become quite neglected. And there's many reasons for that. And there's also a lot of difficulty nowadays in finding unbroken lineages and people who are qualified to actually teach and help in a known way. In terms of secret teachings and private and intimate, circumstances of receiving a lot of help in that way, I'm sure there are many, but on a public platform, it's very difficult to find qualified, lineage holders that are really authentically really doing that job, which is not easy when you're doing it publicly, helping and liberating and educating and supporting and teaching based on everyone's capacity. In ancient Greece, and you'll find this also similar at times in ancient India, where there's been very awakened schools of thought and help for the people in that way to get people liberated, there's also been attacks on those people, and such people have been killed or murdered. And it's a sad truth, but in a public setting where there's fame involved, where you become known for doing things that really change the universe at the time and place, there's always threats to those people's lives. And some say it's due to the magnitude of transformation that's involved, and that does provoke a lot of negativity, because who wants to be moved out of their comforts? Even if you're helping them, even if you're doing everything you can to liberate them, to serve the greater good, not everyone is ready for what that's like. So then we fall prey to the negativity in our psyche and listen to the wrong narrative, and then attack and harm. And sadly, some have gone too far. And this has happened over and over and over again throughout the course of history. And so when I look at my teacher, and he's still with us, and I pray he will be for a very, very long time, because you can't find teachers like that easily that are doing what he does on a public level, which involves a lot of controversy, which involves a lot of limitations, which involves a lot of also facades, because not everyone is authentically there serving what he's trying to do. Where there's people of power, there's going to be people interested in power. So it's not easy for him to, from where I sit, to, I guess, do the clean cut. But the great thing is he does it. He still manages to do it. And that's why I wholeheartedly pray that he can always have whatever he needs to keep liberating people and beings and helping people get enlightened. It's an incredible, incredible, immaculate capacity to do it publicly. And it's also very, very hard, as I have already expressed. So I think, yes, for someone who's been watching him, me personally, my whole life, from the womb until now, he's been there with me. And I've been watching him my whole life, and to see his own evolution, to be an onlooker, to see how, he's evolved as a great master among the people with the lineages he holds. It's a learning curve, because imagine you see someone from the start, from when there's nothing there, when, there's just potatoes and rocks, and then, there's the display of going into Hollywood and making films, and then, there's worldwide assistance, seeing a teacher go to many different communities that have, lost teachers or have struggled to, I guess, establish after loss, after not having their own teachers there, and how he's rescued communities and done so much in ways that it all gets, I guess, put out of the immediate understanding of those who are following such a great master. Because you see someone talking on YouTube nowadays, right? And you listen to them, and that's what you receive. But imagine before YouTube, before the internet, getting to see my teacher my whole life, which is over 40 years, away from the technological component, and then how it all entered that over time, I bring my biased opinion into this about how I think technology can also destroy the preciousness of the guru-student relationship, of the teacher-student relationship. It can also destroy the sacredness in what is being offered, because so much is easily accessible, so we don't understand the value of having an actual, realized, authentic teacher there. And because everything's so instant, it's become so difficult to understand the value of also contemplation and learning through contemplation. Losing that is losing almost everything, and even the ancient Greeks would agree. So I've gone off talking about this, gone off the line of what I'm focusing on here, but it all does link together, because, in a world like today, where we're bound to our birthrights, what we're birthed to commit to, what we're birthed to serve. And then we're also bound to the process of the debts that have to be paid, and, our ability to accumulate also through our virtuous actions and through doing our best. And inquiries there as well, but generally there's a lot that we're already bound to as we get birthed, and we have to commit to those, destinies, or in more simple words, rhythms, patterns, personal rhythms and patterns. And then we really believe in those, And as we get so caught up in believing in those, we actually forget that there's a whole universe here. And if not one, they're infinite. So why get so narrow-minded into thinking that only one thing is great and everything else isn't, or, just defending one component or respecting one component. This is why a lot of issues in this whole universe, infinite times, have taken place, through all the breakages within religious bodies, within different belief systems, divinity worship. Anywhere where there's a group of people and there's a belief, there's going to be challenges, right? So Enlightened Lineages as a whole is an excellent thing to respect and explore, because it predates even the Buddha of this time. If we look at, for example, ancient India and the path to awakening, the Buddha of this time being Shakyamuni, because there's many other awakened beings that came before him. Many, and there's been so many awakened beings, and there are going to be so many who will come. And a lot of people will say, well, how come, awakened female or in the form of the feminine representations are difficult to, historically pinpoint? And I will agree and say yes, because a lot of them have been wiped out or hidden away. Did any of you know that one of Socrates' main teachers was a woman, and she was incredible, and she really taught him about the path of great bliss and how that involves the expansion of the heart, and not singularly, uniting with a soul, a being, a entity, but how we can expand and contract. So focusing on the expansion of the heart and really being capable of just truly loving all this universe, and how that is a practice. Imagine, Socrates had that, and Plato has talked about it. So what I'm saying here is there have been many, many awakened females. And in fact, there's probably more awakened females than there's ever been any awakened man. And I'm not saying this in a sexist way. I'm saying this because it's a fact. Because women have always taken the hidden throne, in many of what has taken place in the last few thousand years, because of the way the world has evolved and how the structure of, certain things such as what we know as the patriarch have dominated, and matriarchal lineages and the sacred feminine as being the exalted figure in society. The matriarch, the mother, started to decline as the patriarch became the dominant force. So it's natural a lot of information and data and lineages around that was not available, but there still are. We have it in ancient India, we have it in ancient Greece, and you'll find incredible figures in both ancient India and ancient Greece if you look at the stories of realized beings and the women that have appeared in those stories and that have been part of the awakening or quest or capacity to teach of the person involved. And yes, there are really so many realized female masters as there are male masters, and they're still with us. And this is why linking up, I think, understanding the value of the link between ancient India and ancient Greece is very helpful, because we come out of the boundary of the East and West. We come out of the boundary of that division, for starters, because it wasn't like that long ago. People were very aware there was great wisdom in India in the time of ancient Greece. Even Alexander the Great had to go there because it was quite an important place. We don't get the details given to us correctly. Once upon a time, what this whole world really cared about was enlightened lineages and the wisdom traditions that were available. And all of that has been made to look like it wasn't the focus, but it really was. The building of temples, the honoring of divinities, the mystery schools around certain ancient, awakened, divine beings, all of that was just so paramount and key. And in ancient India, it was full as well, and not to mention the rest of this earth and all the different lineages that come with different locations that have done so much to awaken beings. But it's not easy to work with the fragments in some regions, It's very hard because a lot of places have had so much literally wiped out to the core where you just cannot be totally certain of what you're seeing, but you can guess. And in my recent travels around Syrian and Turkish lands, it's incredible in those very, very hidden places what you can find. And I will talk about that another day, but again, with the emphasis on enlightened lineages, especially coming also from the once was glory of the sacred feminine matriarchal societies and the divinity worship around the Great Mother Goddess, and these secret dimensions that were forcefully eradicated, as you can all imagine. But yes, I speak of my teacher, Dzongsar Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, frequently because I really do want him to keep on doing what he does for this whole universe and not be abused or mistreated or in any way harmed and seen for what he really is. Someone who's literally sacrificed his whole life, his own joys and pleasures and things that he really wanted, I would say, if he was just living as an ordinary being, having a mundane lifestyle. He's, really gone full throttle into doing everything he can to protect and help infinite truth seekers and make sure many do understand what that means and obtain a path, at the very least want one. And it's a very hard job. So if someone like him can be with us, I'm sure there are many who can say, well then, we must all still be on the right track if there are these beings still available. And I'm happy to say personally that the protection around the awakened lineages, liberation lineages, getting awakened, around the Himalayan schools of wisdom and so on, they've been very protected until recent times. And that's what's made them so wonderful, because those who have had access to them, have got a direct line to many thousands of years ago, and they've been able to get the path and understand where they're going. And what's the most remarkable and beautiful of all this is the main pulse, it's to really help and benefit others, the selflessness involved, the concern of others involved is just one of the most beautiful things, and the fun kind of destructive mechanism of all of these sacred wisdom traditions is that when people approach them wanting power or wanting selfish agendas or wanting to obtain something for their ego identity or so on, it self-destructs, because nothing in any enlightened directional path, and the ancient Greeks can vouch this, they can say correct, nothing without a sincere and total concern and wish to serve others and benefit everyone and the whole universe, not just ourselves, is more important. And everything that we're receiving, right? If that isn't the truth in our hearts, if it isn't for everybody else and for what we can do for others and for how much we can serve others and for how much we can benefit others, if that's not it deep down, then it won't sit. It doesn't matter how much money you pay for something, or how often you hear a teaching, or how much you want to be someone. It just won't work. So the secret of the universe, I think, is also that it's about helping others. It's about really caring with all your heart for the betterment of others. And as Suresh Jindal would always tell me, he found me to be a very loving person. And, some would complain about that. But he would always stand up and say, no, so much value in being loving. And, now, so many years later, I can understand how that's the treasure, because one thing about loving and caring, when it's not done in vain, you'll never lose. When you really wholeheartedly, unconditionally are concerned about the other, even if they ignore you, even if they don't care, they don't get it, they can't see it, at least you've personally, authentically done everything the best you can. And what all ancient paths to enlightenment incorporate is this acceptance of the intention, the aspiration, of wanting to do our best. The ancient Greeks can be quite tough in their wisdom traditions. I would say they're even tougher than the ancient Indians, because you either have it or you don't. You either, see it or you don't. And that can be also because of the peoples of that time, because different parts of the world have different capacity of people and how the people relate to what they're receiving. But still, the pulse is about dissolving the ego. The ancient Greeks were the ones who created the word idiot. The word idiot was an ancient Greek thing. They created that word. And for them, idiot, was someone who, wasn't okay. They're obviously missing something. They're not understanding. They're not wise. They're not waking up to the reality. They're not realizing the nature of mind. And the ancient Indians, see the pulse of all complications around the self, the ego, is this ignorance, right? And then so much else is there within that ignorance, but that being the main thing that, makes us all keep on chasing our tails. So it's important to give thanks to structural hierarchies, systems that are really serving of the truth, because equality, when it's fake, it's not going to help us. They're a really incredible wisdom tradition, truth-seeking, and have found the truth beings out there that can help. And we're so lucky we still have them. So, yes, and there's quite a few appearing in Greece too, which I'm very impressed about. So the lineages of enlightenment, they will rise. And that's the aim. And it's an ongoing talk, it's an ongoing sharing campaign around all of these incredible subjects that really do inspire, I'm sure. But yes, just being very happy and grateful that we can aspire to be awakened for the benefit of others, and that there have been awakened beings and there are fully realized beings everywhere, and they have been everywhere on this earth, and they are actually the real rulers of this earth. And we have to be ready to realize that, because once we can, it's all going to become much more fun